A boot caught the back of her knee and she went down hard. Her tray flew. A pitcher of red wine burst across the stone floor, then across the front of a thin gray dress. Laughter rolled through the great hall. Two hands grabbed her collar and hauled her half upright, only to shove her back down into the spreading pool of wine. Someone pinched their nose and shouted that she smelled like a wet dog. The crowd howled louder. She was small, barefoot, her knuckles raw from scrubbing floors since dawn. Her name was Wren Ashcombe, and until that night nobody in the pack had bothered to learn it. But high above the hall on a black stone dais, a crowned man rose slowly to his feet, his nostrils flaring wide. What did that 1 cent do to a king who had waited 10 long years? Stay with me. Now here's the thing you need to understand about Wren Ashcombe. She had lived in the Crestfall pack her entire life, and still, almost nobody in it had ever really looked at her. She was the orphan. Her parents had died in a border sickness when she was 6, and after that she belonged to no one, which in a wolf pack is a dangerous thing to be. She slept in a storeroom off the kitchens. She woke before the sun. She scrubbed the long stone floors of the great hall on her hands and knees, and when she finished those, she hauled water, and when she finished that, she scrubbed something else. She was an Omega. In Crestfall, that word was treated like an insult. Omegas were supposed to be soft, sweet-smelling, valuable mates for strong men. But an Omega with no family, no dowry, and no protector was just a servant who could be pushed around a little harder than the rest. And nobody pushed harder than the Vane twins. Cassius and Corin Vane were betas, sons of the pack steward, and they had grown up believing the world owed them entertainment. They were 19 now, big-shouldered, loud, always together. Where one went, the other followed, and trouble came with both. For years, Wren had been their favorite game. They tripped her on the stairs. They lost her shoes. They emptied buckets she just filled and laughed while she filled them again. Once they'd shoved her face first into a snowbank and held her there until she thought her lungs would burst, and when the steward heard about it, he'd only shrugged. "Boys," he said, "she's fine. She learned to be small. She learned to be quiet. She learned that the safest thing in the world was to be invisible, and she got very, very good at it. But there was one thing she could not hide, and that was her scent. Every wolf has a scent. It's how they know each other in the dark. Most were plain smoke, earth, rain, but Wren's was different, and it had been different since the night she turned 18. It came in without warning, the way a true Omega's scent does. Sweet, yes, but underneath the sweetness was something else. Something like cold mountain air and warm iron together. It didn't smell like a servant. It smelled like something that didn't belong on its knees in a kitchen. The other servants noticed. The betas noticed. And it made them cruel, because a thing that doesn't fit is a thing people want to break. Twice a year, Crestfall held the ball festival. And this autumn it was going to be different, because the king himself was coming. Alpha King Rurik Draven ruled every pack for 100 miles, and the stories about him were the kind mothers used to quiet children. They said he was enormous. They said he had killed 3 challengers for his crown and never once raised his voice while doing it. They said a silver wolf named Ghostpaw walked at his side like a second shadow and answered to no one else alive. And they said one more thing, quieter than the rest. They said the king carried a bond mark on his chest that had never been claimed. A bond mark is the sign of a true mate. It burns onto the skin the night your other half is born, and it aches until the day you find them. Rurik Draven's mark had burned for 10 years without an answer. 10 years he had searched. The pack whispered that the king had finally stopped looking, that he had come to Crestfall only to name an heir and be done with it. Wren heard all of this the way she heard everything, while cleaning with her head down, pretending not to listen. On the night of the festival, the steward found her in the kitchens with her arms up to the elbows in gray water. He shoved a folded paper into her wet hands. "Take this to the head table," he snapped. "The seneschal is waiting on it. Go now and don't let the king see your face." Wren looked down at herself. Her only good dress was thin and gray and patched at both elbows. Her feet were bare. She smelled of lye and cold water. To walk into that hall in front of the whole gathered pack in front of the king, it was the last thing on earth she wanted. But an order is an order, and an orphan who says no doesn't eat. So she wiped her hands, tucked the message against her chest, and went. The great hall was the largest room she had ever stood in. Hundreds of voices, music, the clatter of plates. Long tables ran the length of it, packed with pack members in their festival best. At the far end, 3 steps up on that black stone dais, sat the king. She kept her eyes down. She hugged the message to her chest and started along the edge of the room, quiet, small, invisible, exactly the way she'd taught herself to be. She almost made it. Then a voice she knew too well cut through the crowd. Well, look what crawled out of the kitchen. Cassius, and where Cassius was Corin, they came at her from both sides, grinning, cups in hand, faces flushed with wine. "Easy, brother," Corin said. "It's delivering the king's mail." He sniffed loudly, made a face. "Gods, though, you could have bathed first. You smell like the bottom of a mop bucket." Wren tried to step around them. "Please, I have a message for the head table." "A message," Cassius repeated, delighted. "Did you hear that? She has business with the king." He looked at his brother. Something passed between them the way it always did, and Wren felt her stomach drop because she knew that look. Corin's boot shot out. It caught her ankle mid-step. She pitched forward, arms flying, and the message tumbled out of her hands. She hit the stone hard on her hands and knees, and the whole nearby table turned to look. Cassius, quick as a snake, snatched a full pitcher of red wine off the table and, laughing the whole time, appended it over her. The wine soaked her hair, ran down her face, drenched the gray dress until it clung to her, dark and dripping. Cassius grabbed the back of her collar, hauled her halfway up, and shoved her down again into the puddle. Corin pinched his nose. "It smells like a wet dog." He shouted, and the tables closest to them roared. The laughter spread. That's the cruel thing about a crowd, it doesn't check what it's laughing at. It just joins in. Within seconds, half the great hall was howling, and Wren knelt in a spreading pool of wine with her hair in her face, shaking, wishing with everything in her that the floor would open up and swallow her whole. Then something changed in the air. It started at the head table and moved outward, table by table, like a cold wind. The laughter faltered. Voices dropped. People turned, not toward Wren now, but toward the dais, because the king had risen. Rurik Draven stood at his full height, and he was every inch as big as the stories said, a head taller than any man in the room, shoulders like a doorway, a black beard, and a plain iron crown. But it wasn't his size that silenced the hall. It was his face. The king had gone pale. One of his huge hands was pressed flat against the center of his own chest, against the bond mark hidden under his shirt, and his eyes were fixed on the small soaked figure kneeling in the wine, because her scent had reached him. It had crossed the whole length of that crowded hall, cold mountain air and warm iron, sweet underneath, and it had struck the mark on his skin like a bell. For 10 years that mark had ached. Now it burned, and there was only one thing in all the world that could make it burn like that. His mate was in the room. Beside him, a shape rose from the shadows of the dais. Silver fur, pale eyes, big as a small pony. Ghost paw. The wolf's ears came forward, its nose lifted. And a low sound started in its chest that made every wolf in the hall go still. Rurik came down off the dais. He didn't hurry. He didn't shout. He came down the 3 black steps one at a time, and the crowd peeled back from him like water from the bow of a ship. Cassius and Corin, who a moment ago had been laughing, now stood frozen with their cups still in their hands, watching the king of every pack for 100 miles walk straight toward them. Except he didn't stop at them. He walked past the twins as if they were furniture. And in the middle of that enormous silent hall, the king lowered himself down onto one knee in a puddle of spilled wine, in front of an orphan servant, and gently, so gently, brushed the wet hair back from her face. "Look at me," he said. His voice was low. It carried anyway. "Please look at me." Ren looked up, and the strangest thing happened. The fear drained out of her. She didn't understand it. This was the most powerful man alive, kneeling in front of her, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off him, and instead of terror she felt something she had never once felt in her whole life. She felt safe. "You're hurt," Rurik said quietly. He took her cold hands in his enormous warm ones and helped her slowly to her feet. He pulled his own dark cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around her, wine and all. The hall didn't make a sound. Someone brought a cloth. Someone brought water. The king steadied her with one arm and murmured low just for her, "It's all right now. Nobody here will ever touch you again. It's over." And for one long, warm, quiet moment, standing wrapped in the king's cloak with his hand steady on her shoulder, Ren believed him. It wasn't over. It was only beginning. A single voice broke the silence. It came from the side of the hall, sharp and furious. "Stop this! Stop this at once!" The steward pushed through the crowd. Aldous Vane was a thin, gray man with a chain of office around his neck and 40 years of pack law behind him. He was also the father of the two boys now standing frozen by the wine, and he had watched the king kneel to a kitchen servant with a growing look of horror. "My king," Aldous said, and he bowed low, but his voice was hard. "Forgive me, but you do not know what you are doing. That creature is an orphan. She has no line, no rank, no standing in this pack or any other. And her scent," he pointed a shaking finger, "her scent is not natural. It came upon her overnight. No true Omega blooms in a single night. That is the mark of scent craft. Witchery. She has thrown a lure, my king, and you have walked into it." The words landed like stones. And here's what you have to understand. A moment ago, Ren's problem had been two cruel boys in a room full of laughter. Cruelty she knew. Cruelty she could survive. But this was something else. Aldous Vane had just spoken the word witchery in front of the whole pack, and in Crestfall, Scentcraft carried one sentence and one only: death. He wasn't trying to embarrass her anymore. He was trying to get her killed, legally, cleanly, before this Omega could rise above his sons and shame his family forever. The crowd's mood shifted again. You could feel it. Fear is contagious. People who had been laughing now looked at Ren with narrow, uncertain eyes. A woman near the front pulled her child back. The word passed from mouth to mouth. "Witch! Witch!" Rurik's arm tightened around her shoulders. "She is my mate," he said. His voice filled the hall without rising. "The mark on my chest has burned for her since the night she was born. I felt it the moment her scent touched the air. Do you call your king a fool, steward?" Aldous did not back down. That's the thing about a man defending his sons, he'll walk right up to a wolf. "I call my king bewitched," he said, "and the law agrees with me. No mate claim, not even a king, stands without proving. It is written. Before this pack accepts a bond, the Omega must survive the right of the mark." He turned to the hall, playing to them now. "Let the wolf decide. If she is what she claims, the Alpha's own wolf will kneel to her. And if she is a witch," he let it hang, "the wolf will do what wolves do to liars." A murmur ran through the crowd. The right of the mark hadn't been called in living memory. It was old and it was brutal, and everyone in that hall knew what it meant. They would bring the Omega into the open, alone, unprotected, and set the Alpha's wolf loose to judge her. If the bond was true, the wolf would yield. If it wasn't, if there was any lie in her at all, a wolf the size of Ghostpaw would tear her apart before the king could cross the floor. Ren felt her knees go weak. "I never did any witchery," she whispered. "I swear it, I don't even know what I am." "I know what you are," Rurik said, low only to her. But she saw the muscle jump in his jaw, and she understood with a cold drop in her stomach. that even the king could not simply say no. 400 pack members had heard the accusation. If he refused the rite, they would always believe he'd hidden a witch. His crown, her name, the truth of the bond, all of it now hung on whether a wolf would kneel or kill. Then Rurik did something no one expected. He reached up and tore open the front of his own shirt. There, over his heart, was the bond mark. Almost no one had ever seen it. It was a dark, curling shape, like a bird in flight wrapped around a crescent. And as Ren's scent filled the air around him, it glowed, faint and warm, a living ember under his skin. "You want proof," the king said. "This mark has answered no one for 10 years. Look at it now." He turned so the nearest tables could see it burning. Then he looked down at Ren and his voice gentled. "Show them your left shoulder, little one. You've had a mark there your whole life and been told it was a scar, haven't you?" Ren's hand flew to her shoulder. How did he know? She had a mark there, a dark curling shape the other servants mocked as an ugly birthmark. Slowly, with shaking fingers, she pulled the wine-soaked collar aside. The same shape, a bird in flight wrapped around a crescent. The exact same mark, glowing now with the exact same faint, warm light. The hall gasped as one. "Now, before I tell you what the rite did to the Vane family, and believe me, by the end of this night the name Vane meant something very different in Crestfall, do me one small favor. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. It genuinely helps this channel more than you know, and it means you won't miss how this ends. All right." Back to the hall, where the king had just bared his heart, and the steward had just realized his mistake. For a moment, Aldous Vane wavered. 2 matching marks, both glowing, even he couldn't wave that away. But a cornered man is a dangerous man, and Aldous had 2 sons standing in a puddle of the evidence of their cruelty. If the Omega rose, his boys fell. So he found his voice and he made it cold. "A witch can copy a mark as easily as a scent," he said. "Glamour and trickery. My king, if you are so certain, then you have nothing to fear from the rite. Let the wolf decide. Or does the king fear the answer?" It was a trap, and everyone knew it. Rurik could not refuse now without looking like he doubted his own bond. Slowly, the king's head turned toward the steward, and for the first time all night, something dangerous moved behind his eyes. "Clear the floor," Rurik said. They dragged the tables back against the walls. The crowd pressed into a great ring, 4 and 5 deep, silent now, hungry the way crowds get when they smell blood coming. In the middle of it all they left a wide, empty circle of stone, still wet with wine. And into that circle they brought Ren. They took the king's cloak from her shoulders. That was part of the rite. The Omega faced the wolf alone with nothing. Rurik's jaw was tight as iron as they walked her out, and when she looked back at him, terrified, he held her eyes and mouthed 3 words: "Trust the bond." Then they led her to the center and they left her there, small and soaked and shaking, and everyone stepped back. At the far side of the circle, a handler unclipped the heavy chain from Ghostpaw's collar. The silver wolf stepped into the ring. Now, I want you to picture this. A wolf the size of a small pony, all muscle and silver fur, pale eyes fixed on a barefoot girl who wouldn't reach its shoulder standing up. It had killed before. It answered to one man alive and no other. And it was walking, slow and low, straight toward her. Ren's whole body screamed at her to run. That's the animal in all of us. When death comes close, it says move. But there was nowhere to run to. A wall of 400 wolves ringed her on every side. So she did the only thing left to her. She stopped fighting. She let her hands fall open at her sides, and she stood still and looked at the wolf coming to judge her. Ghostpaw reached her. The great head lowered. The black lips peeled back off teeth as long as her fingers. A growl rolled up out of that chest, so deep she felt it in her own ribs, and the whole hall stopped breathing. Aldous Vane leaned forward with a thin, ugly hope on his face. Cassius and Corin watched with their mouths open. The wolf sniffed her, and then everything changed. The growl died in its throat. The pale eyes an inch from her face went soft. The huge head pushed forward not to bite but to press gently against her chest, right over the glowing mark on her shoulder. Ghostpaw breathed her in. And then the wolf that answered to no one alive but the king folded its front legs and lay down at Wren's bare feet, and rolled its silver throat up to her, the way a wolf only ever does for one thing in all the world. Its packmate. Its own. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Wren, hardly knowing what she did, sank down and put both her small hands into the thick fur of that enormous neck, and the wolf leaned into her like a dog half its size, and a sound went through the crowd, not a laugh this time. A gasp. And then from somewhere in the back a single voice shouted, "The bond is true," and the whole hall broke open into a roar. Rurik crossed the floor in 6 long strides. He dropped to his knees beside her in front of the entire pack, a king on his knees, twice in one night, and pulled her against his chest, and Wren felt his heart hammering as hard as her own. "I've got you," he said into her hair. "It's proven. It's done. You're mine and I'm yours, and no law on this earth can touch you now." Then he stood and he turned, and the warmth went out of his face like a door closing. "Aldous Vane," the king said. The steward had gone the color of old ash. He dropped to his knees. "My king, I only followed the law. I only meant to protect the pack. You named my mate a witch." Rurik's voice was very quiet now, and that was worse than any shout. "You demanded a right that could have killed her, to hide the fact that your son spilled wine on an orphan for sport. You would have let that wolf tear the other half of my soul apart in front of this whole pack. To protect your boys." He let that sit. "So let us talk about your boys." Ghostpaw rose from Wren's feet, and slowly, deliberately, the silver wolf began to walk toward Cassius and Corin. The twins backed away until the crowd behind them wouldn't let them go any further. Ghostpaw circled them once, then again, close enough that they could feel its breath, and neither boy so much as twitched, because they had both just watched what that wolf could do, and they had both just watched it choose to be gentle. They understood, maybe for the first time in their lives, that gentleness was a choice, and that it could be taken away. "Cassius and Corin Vane," Rurik said, "for 10 years you tormented a child of this pack because no one stood behind her. Tonight you tripped her, drenched her, and mocked the scent of the woman marked by your king before you were even born." He looked at them for a long moment. "Here is what it costs you. You are stripped of the name Vane and every rank it carried. From tonight you own nothing and command no one. For 3 years you will serve the kitchens of this hall, you will scrub these floors on your knees before the sun, haul the water and empty the buckets. You will live as she lived. And Wren Ashcombe, my mate and your future queen, will decide the day your service ends. Not me, her." He turned to Aldous. "And you, steward, who knew what your sons were and called it boys, you will serve beside them. You taught them cruelty was free. I am teaching all 3 of you what it costs." The hall was silent, and then it wasn't. It started at the back where the other servants stood, the ones who had carried water and scrubbed floors beside Wren for years, who had never once been able to help her. It started with them, and it spread forward through the whole pack until the great hall shook with it. Not laughter this time. Cheering. Wren stood in the middle of it all, wrapped again in the king's cloak. The silver wolf pressed warm against her leg, and she watched the 2 boys who had made her childhood a misery be led away toward the very kitchen she had lived in. And she felt no triumph, only a strange, quiet, unbelieving stillness, like a person waking slowly from a long, bad dream. They didn't finish the festival that night. How could they? You can't dance after something like that. The pack drifted out into the cold in 2s and 3s, talking low, and by morning there wasn't a soul in 100 miles who hadn't heard how the king knelt twice in one night for a kitchen orphan, and how his own wolf laid its throat bare at her feet. Wren didn't go back to the storeroom. They gave her a room with a window and a real bed, and for the first 3 nights she couldn't sleep in it. 10 years of waking before dawn doesn't leave a body just because someone tells it to. She kept getting up in the dark out of habit, reaching for a scrub brush that wasn't there. Once a servant found her on her knees in her own room, cleaning the hearth, and gently took the cloth from her hands and told her kindly that she didn't have to do that anymore. Wren cried for an hour after that, not from sadness. She didn't have a word for what it was from. The king, for all his size and all his crown, turned out to be a patient man. He didn't press the bond on her. He knew a mark on the skin doesn't heal what's happened to the heart underneath. So he did small things. He ate with her. He walked with her along the walls in the evenings, Ghostpaw padding behind, and he told her about the 10 years he'd spent looking, about the mark that ached, about how he'd almost given up the very week he rode into Crestfall. "I felt you the moment you fell," he told her once. "I didn't know it was you. I only knew the ache had turned to fire. And then I looked down and there you were on the floor and the whole world went quiet." He shook his head. 10 years. And you were scrubbing my great hall the whole time." As for Cassius and Corin, they scrubbed. Every dawn, the same gray water, the same cold stone, the same long floors Wren had scrubbed since she was 6. The pack watched it happen, and something in the pack changed, because it's one thing to hear that cruelty has a price and another thing to watch 2 proud boys on their knees learning it. Their father knelt beside them. Aldous Vane, who had known every word of pack law, learned the one lesson he'd skipped. And here's the part that surprised everyone, Wren most of all. She didn't hate them. Months later, deep in winter, she went down to the kitchens as a queen now, in warm clothes, with the king's ring on her hand, and she stood in the doorway and watched the 3 of them work. Cassius had thinner shoulders now. Corin didn't laugh at all anymore. And Wren, who had every right in the world to leave them there for the full 3 years, found that she didn't want to be the thing that had been done to her. "Stand up," she told them. They stood. They wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm ending your service," she said. "Not because you've earned it, because I won't spend my life keeping someone on their knees. I know what it does to a person. I'm not going to be the one who does it to you." She looked at them a long moment. "Go be better than your father taught you." That's the whole sentence. That's all of it. They went, and whether they became better men, well, that's another story for another night. But the youngest kitchen girl swore that Cassius, on his way out, stopped and set his scrub brush down very carefully, the way you set down something you finally understand. Wren Ashcombe was crowned queen of the northern packs in the spring. They held the ceremony in the great hall, the same black stone, the same floor. And here's the thing I keep coming back to. When she walked in that day, in white and silver with Ghostpaw at her side and the king waiting at the dais, she walked in along the exact stretch of floor where she had fallen, where the wine had spilled, where 400 people had laughed at a soaked, shaking orphan on her hands and knees. She stopped there, just for a second. Nobody else knew why. Then she kept walking, up to the man who had come down off his throne for her when she had nothing, and she took his hand, and she turned to face the pack that had once laughed and now stood in silence out of respect. Nobody said a word. The room just went quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one from that autumn night. That one had been the silence of people watching someone fall. This one was the silence of people watching someone rise. And the orphan who used to be invisible looked out over every face that had once looked away from her, and she wasn't afraid of a single one of them anymore.